Perfect.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show this afternoon, a rare Thursday afternoon live with our guest today, Luke Cohen, who has an incredible multi-dimensional experience, a near-death experience, among many other things. If you've heard him before, it's quite we're in for quite a ride, and he was recently on the Jeff Mara podcast. You may have heard of him there, but we'll get into him very shortly here. Before that, I'd like to remind everybody that our conference is only 18 days away. If you're looking to come to a 4-day disclosure event in Grafton, Illinois, right here in the Midwest, this is our fourth annual event, and tickets are still available. 4-day passes, 1-day passes, or a virtual pass if you can't make it in person. And those tickets are available at journeytotruth.online. And we will be going to Cahokia Mounds, which is a sacred site, a North American pyramid site that no one really knows about. And it's ancient, and at one point it was the largest civilization in North America. And there's a lot of interesting activity happening surrounding that site right now, including, well, we'll get into that in a little bit, but there's definitely so there's a mound memorial in St. Louis for Mound City that was recently destroyed and defaced. And it's actually very sad that it happened, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I also want to remind everybody that my brand new book is is finally out, Bleed Through Tales from Another Timeline. And what I find interesting about our guest today is he speaks of bleed over or bleed through from other timelines that he's experienced. And when listening to his interviews, it reminded me a lot of myself, and I see a lot of similarities there. So I can't wait to pick your brain and just have these multi-dimensional conversations and really just dive deep into what's actually happening here. And in one of your interviews, you said Earth is a multi-dimensional experiment. So I'd like to, explore what you mean by that a little bit and just welcome you to the show. And maybe we can continue where we left off before we started rolling the camera. So welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. What's up, everybody? Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
great to have
so
you.
in a nutshell, um, I guess explain to our audience, who you are, and we can go. I know it's not impossible to do in a nutshell, but just kind of
Yeah.
let.
Yeah. I mean, long story short, I had a really intense healing crisis when I was 22 that got me on a spiritual path. In that healing crisis, I went from being an agile martial artist and competitive athlete to walking with a cane overnight. Spinal injury, nervous system burnout. I was pushing myself really hard. Didn't know I was an empath. Didn't know, I was living in a very what I call density denial. So deep in that kind of toxic culture. And yeah, and during that time, I got really depressed because martial arts and basketball and movement was sort of a way that I found peace in flow states. And one day when I was drinking tea out of a cast iron teapot, I had a memory of being a Taoist hermit in a cave in a past life. And I saw where my soul had been with me my whole life up until that point. I kind of merged back and I tasted what I call the living stillness of the universe. And it trumped every peak experience I have ever had in my life. And I started eating psychedelics pretty young. I was eating mushrooms at 13, reading Castaneda, and a lot of summers of LSD as a teen. And this was like every flow state I ever achieved through martial arts and basketball, runner's high, every psychedelic experience, every sexual experience I've ever had. This annihilated it in comparison. And the level of how much my mind disappeared and the truth of my soul was felt. And then I came back from that experience with what the yogis call moksha, which is like a burning desire for enlightenment. And I basically graduated college and I went right to India. I never looked back. And that was about 20 years ago. So when I left the conventional world and I went on a path of mysticism to originally to heal my body, like I was like walking with a cane. And I went to doctors, I went to, everybody, and they were like, we don't know what's wrong with you. They couldn't tell me. MRI did the whole thing. They're like, yeah, you probably need a hip replacement when you're 30. By the way, I'm sprinting at 41 now. So, you know, got gaslit through that whole system and basically had to go on a path of healing myself. And so as I began to heal myself, I started to get passionate about what works and what doesn't. And then, got really passionate about community because I felt like there was a lack of community in the world where I came from, and I didn't know anybody was living that lifestyle. And so I started to curate community with a business partner in New York. And so, yeah, so I've had a long journey of doing deep healing work, building community. I'm also an artist. And my mission is to shift culture on the planet. And when it
Oh,
comes to the multidimensional and the mystical, I'm definitely a bridge from that to like I would say the practical, the relational. So I've gone very far out, as far out as you can go into consciousness. And I think that we're in a time where we have to return to our humanity, return to how we can function in society, in the world, have healthy relationships, have functioning businesses. So I've been in that full spectrum of going out and, you know, been to the jungles with the medicine men. I've spent immersive apprenticeships with some very far out mystical people, and that was what I dedicated my life to. And at some point, I was asked to come back and start to return to the world, return to society. So here I am, with a foot in both worlds. Happy to be here.
yeah, it's
Beautiful.
incredible. And, listening to your journey, I mean, you've definitely played with psychedelics, and that's very apparent. And I think that's a beautiful thing because I think that's where the expansion occurs. And the further I get down my path, I realize, like, when I'm having conversations with people about truth and the nature of reality, it's very apparent where their programming, where their information stems from. And if somebody has explored psychedelics, their
Yeah,
answers and perspectives are so much grander, right?
right.
And just zoomed out and beautiful. And
Yeah.
then you can also, and the people who haven't dabbled in that, their explanations are very rooted, they're very surface level, and they're grounded here and what fits. And I love your perspectives because you truly do. I know I keep saying this, have a multi-dimensional perspective because, you even mentioned like tapping into parallel versions of yourself and that bleeds through sometimes. So maybe you can explain what that's like, for you.
Yeah. And just to speak to psychedelics, I started as a young psychonaut, and then I put everything down for a while on a path of sobriety and a very deep practice of yoga, and met mystics that were living in that state without anything. And then I returned to it from an indigenous worldview, an indigenous led ceremony. So I got deep into plant medicine with native peoples and how they work with that traditionally. So my second phase of initiation with psychoactive plants was through very traditional methods of healing in tribal cultures that have lived this way for thousands of years. And then at one point, I was also asked to let go of all of it and move into a deeper path of sobriety again, which is where I'm at now. I tend to, I think it's important in a phase for some people, and for some people they'll work with it their whole lives. Like I have, you know, almost 12 years of experience specifically with ayahuasca and 15 years of peyote, and I really respect those traditions and that traditional way of doing it. What I'm seeing now in the world is a bit of an erosion of that level of reverence and initiatory rites to work with it in a healthy way. And so I do want to address that because there can be very psychedelic heavy culture out there, and festival culture, and it was a really beautiful part of my life at one point. And now where I'm at 41, I'm like, okay, cool. Once you get the message, hang up the phone. Like at some point you got to come back and grow roots, and the Taoist teachings, and sort of having really powerful teachers and mystic teachers in Qigong and those lineages. It's like they have some very radical opposing beliefs around this stuff of like burning the midnight oil, and you know your kidney jing is being harvested to create these visionary experiences, and like that does have consequence and impact on your light body, on your nervous system. And so education and understanding and having other foundational practices can make it a much more beneficial process, because I think that there's a revival. So I was reading Terence McKenna as well, and Terence talks about like, what you're talking about, and that was one of my early sort of developmental, sort of mentors, if you will, was Terence McKenna. And he talks about you know going into that space and coming back with something novel, like bringing something back to the conventional world that like you can't find that in the conventional world. Kind of like you're saying, like if you're really conditioned, you're going to be like kind of regurgitating a mimetic thought form that's been regurgitated from different perspectives, all from the same kind of conventional mind. But when we go into the mystic, we actually bring back an original thought. We bring back a seed of new cultural frameworks of reality, and that's important. We do need to expand the mind, and there is sober ways of doing it through breath work. Like I'm starting a dark room business with my functional medicine brother. Dr. Greg, and to see where we go in a darkroom immersion where you naturally secrete, you know, those kind of compounds without any external force. There's a very different experience. So I'm an advocate for both. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I know it works for me, and I know the importance that my early development, I did get cracked open, and I'm still healing some of the abuse of where I overdid the ayahuasca, or I overdid some of those things, didn't have other things in place yet. And where multidimensionality comes online, psychedelics can help us access that. And I would say the reason that I tipped into a certain embodied relationship with multidimensionality was a lot more through the mentorships that I was doing that was stripping my coping strategies and defense systems, which is like how we develop as children and as young adults and as at different stages, like the ways that we survived our reality. And psychedelics can just rip those away. And all of a sudden you're just a soul, which I believe the soul is actually psychedelic in its nature. So what we call psychedelics is not just the effect of the neurochemistry shifting, it's actually the veils thinning to the natural psychedelic multidimensional state of the soul. That's why, like in Tibetan mythology around the bardos are a very psychedelic type experience. When you leave your body and you die and you go between incarnations, it's like a big psychedelic trip. So there's a lot of this, like, you know, early 60s dialogue between, you know, these tulkus and these rinpoches and these yogis and these mystics and like 60s psychedelic culture. They're like, okay, cool, there's some kind of weird overlap here between mysticism and psychedelics. And there's something about the sustainability of when we dismantle those sort of coping strategies and defense systems naturally and gradually by healing trauma, where the multidimensionality starts to tip over. And so I think psychedelics can be like an infusion of like, yo, you're multidimensional, and there's like, you know, you're fanning the fire of the spirit to know itself as that. But at some point, in order to live into that experience of multidimensionality on a day-to-day basis, it's helpful to have lineage, and it's helpful to have guidance, because essentially all cultures that had initiatic rites, we would be introduced to our multidimensionality gradually because there's a lot of responsibility. And when we open it up too fast, that's where you get psychosis. If you open it up too fast, that's where you get really ungrounded people that can't bring their multidimensionality back into society. And in the age of Aquarius, we need to bring our multidimensionality back to the market. We need to like come out of the cave. We need to come back and then be in village. And that's what we've lost in this time, is both village and the initiatic rites and the integration of how mystical cultures worked with these technologies in more effective, time tested manners. And we're in an accelerated time. So it's like the universe is giving you all the information and all the things in a bombarded way. And so there's risk and reward with that. Right. When you go down an accelerated path of initiation and you don't have anyone to reference, or you don't even know what's happening to you, people get Kundalini awakenings, people get nervous system burnouts, people they'll lose their mind. And that's like the conventional mind's fear of psychedelics, is like, oh, you're going to lose your mind. Right. And there's a healthy version of that, and there's a very real unhealthy version of that when people someone goes into psychosis. But as a practitioner, I understand that psychosis happens when there's not a space for the trauma, when there's not a space for the personality to be able to bridge that multidimensional reality with our third dimensional reality, which is just as powerful and just as sacred as where we go in spirit world. They're equally valid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, there's so much there to unpack, and beautiful explanation. Okay, well, let's jump back to your near-death experience and what you saw when you were in these other realities, in the astral realm, and exploring consciousness, and what revelations occurred there, and then how did you perceive Earth once you came back?
So I've had 3 in my whole life, and the first one happened when I was 4 in anaphylactic shock. And I believe in retrospect that the Arcturians were working with me very deeply when I was 4. And I had this feeling of like expansion and contraction, like my body and relational orientation of space-time was kind of doing this weird accordion sort of experience at 4. And so I had you're 4 years old, your cognition's not even fully onto your 5. So a lot of it was emotional, energetic. And but in retrospect, I can understand what was actually happening to me. And when I kind of left my body at 4, I was in this liminal space that was like this kind of like the breath of the universe, of like this expansion and this contraction. And I was interfacing with what I now know as the Octurians at that time, and how they were trying to stabilize my light body in the initiation that I was going through at 4, and didn't have any frame of reference for it, obviously, at 4 years old. And so it was like one of those things that just gets buried in your subconscious, and then it comes up later through therapeutic process or ceremony or whatever. And then the main one that you guys heard about, that I shared about, was at the onset of COVID. I got dengue fever. Didn't know it was dengue when I had it, and I did the worst thing that you can do during a dengue fever, which is fast, because your platelets start to go down, and you actually need to eat and hydrate. And I was like, I got a fever, I'll just fast. Maybe it's this thing that's going around. And then next thing you know, I go to use the toilet, and I'm gone, just gone. No memory, no white light. I was just gone. Next thing I knew, I was traveling down on a what I can only describe as like a DMT light bridge. I've had five MEO experiences. That was the only thing I could describe it as. It's like this golden, bridge. And all of a sudden I was back in my body, and my ex-partner at the time was pounding on my chest, crying. She's like, "Oh my God, you were gone, you were gone, you were gone." And I was like, I was back, and I knew I was back, and I'm like, I'm back. And I could feel all this sort of golden kind of Christ-like energy pouring into me. And I had no fear in my body. And I was like, call an ambulance. And I was very rational, logical, and went in the ambulance. And then I had this kind of shamanic fever journey in the hospital for about a week. And I was accessing these past lives of where I've died from fever. So I would wake up, and I'd be in a castle in Scotland with my wife and child. And there's like a fire. And I have this mortal wound that I'm dying from slowly in my waist. And I go back to sleep, and I wake up, and I'd be in a slum in Calcutta. There's a little Indian child, shaking and sweating with fever. And then I go back to sleep. And I was just going through lifetimes like that. And then I was also tracking like COVID as a consciousness sweeping the planet, and as like this kind of like waveform. And I've had other experiences where I was taken out of my body and being shown things from a very, very high cosmic eagle perspective, looking down into Earth, looking down into energy systems and how things are functioning in a collective consciousness way, or for myself, in 2011, I was taken out of my body, and I was shown the point where I chose to enter the space-time experiences as a human being and have incarnational experiences. And my guides were showing me all of my lifetimes simultaneously, and it was really overwhelming, because they were like, I could see one incarnational pattern of like 600 lifetimes for one lesson, one set of emotions, one set of you could say karmic contracts. And that would be like 600 years of information in just one little section of the map that I was looking at. But I was looking at like 500 things. So that's thousands and thousands and thousands of years of information that I was getting from this cosmic perspective, and then sent back into my human body, and having to integrate that kind of information. And they were basically saying all of those things that are happening they're not linear. They're simultaneously happening. You're meant to go back in and take the things that you need, and let the things that you don't need go for this lifetime. And so when I came back from that experience, I was laughing and crying and shaking, and it was a kind of like a Kundalini type experience. And this was without any medicines. This was like completely sober. And then after that experience, I could perceive the Akashic records, and I could perceive souls in a very particular way, where I could sense in a knowing state their soul's core challenge and their soul's core gift, like what they're here to do, and their biggest challenge to doing it. And like when in sessions, I would start to see their unresolved incarnational experiences, like where there's a lot of emotional charge that hasn't been processed from other lifetimes, which you could say are actually parallel lifetimes. They're not past lives, they're parallel dimensional experiences. So it flips the whole past life thing on its head. And that for me was very confusing, coming from a deep yogic orientation at that time of studying those Vedic sort of teachings of like past lives. And I had past life memories up until that point. Like I saw some powerful mystics in India, and they gave me some darshan, and I saw other incarnations. I saw myself as a mystic Jew and in some desert without any thoughts. I was just like in the desert, just perceiving reality with no mind. And I remember the vastness of the desert and being oriented in soul awareness with no mind, right? And so having those kind of past life memories up until that point, it was like annihilated. And I was like, oh my God, these are parallel timeline experiences. And I would start to have that bleed over that you were excited to talk about, where I'd be like walking in New York and I see a group of people on the horizon. I'd go to reach for my katana and there's no katana and I'm not in Japan. And I'm like, wait, I'm in New York and I'm me this timeline. So these sort of habitual karmic, what we call samskaras or deep impressions, would show up in these little fractal moments. And I'd have to do some kind of inner work to reconcile the orientation that was happening. And then I met my teacher around this time. This happened. One of my teachers who works with the Akash and the Ascended Masters and the Lords of Karma and all this kind of stuff. And that opened up a whole different pathway for me, where I was really used to medicine work now. And I was studying with my maestros and these powerful indigenous healers, while also doing this new work with this kind of, I would say, mystery school around, it was like a deeper kind of soul work. And she would take me into places that medicine never touched. I would go into these crystalline, higher dimensional realms, interfacing with these like light beings just through her sound frequency, through her channel, that ayahuasca wouldn't touch. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy that this is available to us. And it was like the next set of incarnations that I was being asked to call that mastery back to me. So from that healing crisis till now, well, not till now, till about to this near-death experience that I had on dengue, I was walking and through all these different lineages, reclaiming the gifts from those lifetimes and letting go of the karmic residue of those lifetimes, gradually, day to day, week to week, for about 17 years.
Right.
And knew the different mystery schools that I had walked and I had been, and some of the flavors of where they're still relevant now and where aspects of them are not relevant for the Aquarian age. And sort of like, okay, this still has purpose, and this is actually a distortion or distraction, or like, kind of knowing the difference between what was still relative and not.
Right. So, going back to the Earth is a multi-dimensional experiment, um, and you said Earth is a living library of creation, like a school, in a sense. And
Yeah.
you also explained like seeing like a topographic map of the energy, and like I know that's a lot in one question to have you explain, but can you maybe elaborate on why you believe it's an experiment, and then what led you to that conclusion?
So some of it comes from mythology, from teachers that I trust, that are awakened indigenous teachers and other mystics that have given me different frameworks of lenses to look at it from, that would open up. So that's the difference between like knowledge and wisdom. Is like you can read books and get information, and that will digest through the mental body and eventually trickle down to your emotional body, and then maybe eventually, enter into like a spiritual awareness as a framework or an understanding that's beyond the comprehension of the mind. So mystics give transmission that is a transmission of energy that entrains your consciousness to an awareness. So when you're at the foot of like a Buddhic being who has self-realized, and you're working with them, they transmit something to you, and now all of a sudden your soul knows something. Now, many of us have those incarnational experiences of we've achieved some kind of enlightenment in some kind of past life, but in this lifetime, we're meant to be in the world, and so we're not supposed to be this detached, aloof sort of witnessing consciousness kind of being. We're meant to like interface and participate, right? And so a lot of us that are old souls that have had many incarnations, we meet at these events, and all of a sudden we're sharing codes. We're having heart-to-heart dialogue. We're not just giving a bunch of mental noise and ideas about, this is what I think about reality, which like, oh my God, I lived through this thing. And then all of a sudden there's a transmission from my heart to yours, and you're like, whoa, you feel it. And it's kind of sparking some kind of soul awareness for you. And that's like a milder case of that kind of energetic exchange, right? So a lot of my orientation towards what you're asking me came through direct transmissions from awakened beings that were helping me shape my worldview, if you will call it that, was more of my soul awareness around what this situation is. Like, what are we in as an incarnation? Like, and so the combination of my lived experience of having things like that, being taken out of body and looking and from the mythology of some of these teachers and some of these masters, gradually that sort of understanding came about. And one of the teachings that I received was the idea that our chakra system as an experiment is that if you were to go, say, to Sirius or Arcturus as a soul, and that the planetary place in the universe, Arcturus, is a particular kind of mystery school that you go to learn things. So you go to Arcturus to get mastery over a type of third chakra kind of experiment in consciousness. You gain third chakra mastery in Arcturus, and then in Pleiades, you're getting a certain kind of heart chakra mastery. You're getting codes around compassion and discernment. You're getting a type of mystery school initiation as a soul through a particular framework. Earth has 13 simultaneous mystery schools, which are chakras, that are drawing from all these other mystery schools that has seeded that here, and that we're in a simultaneous multidimensionality where we're actually have the opportunity to master 13 chakras in one lifetime. So you're not only just getting the school of the first chakra from Orion, you're not just getting the second chakra of Andromeda, you're not just getting the third chakra of Arcturus, you're not just getting the fourth chakra of Pleiades, you're getting all of them simultaneously. So the risks and reward are more dramatic because we have to go through a veil of forgetfulness when we're in our incarnational experience where we don't have any access, that we chose to be a part of this experiment. And then by the grace of God and the grace of the universe and the grace of our agreement to participate as a star seed or a soul or an angelic soul, whatever soul version that you have, because you have different versions of souls. A lot of angelic souls have experienced a lot of martyrdom and victimization in their lifetimes. They're the ones that are often getting sacrificed. You also have human beings that are straight up demonic, that their soul experience has a demonic sort of origination point, and they're also here in the same dimension at the same time. So we're in this multidimensional space-time continuum where we have lots of different souls going through lots of different lessons, some with access to the memory, some with their memories coming back at varying degrees of forgetfulness and remembrance. And the purpose of Earth is to evolve, to help souls evolve, and its place within the universe, like what we learn here and what we're doing as an experiment in consciousness, ripples out to the whole of creation, because all these master beings and all these creator beings that were part of this experiment, they help shape this world. So we think in through a theological lens, if you go into an Abrahamic religion, and there's a lot of people that are really into alternative history that like to dissect texts and be like, well, how could that be God? They're being referred to as a collective consciousness, like the Elohim, not Elohai. It's like, like these kind of interesting anomalies or incongruencies of like demigods or gods, not the Almighty. Now, the Almighty set the greatest experiment in motion, but within that, there are creator beings that have realized themselves at certain levels of consciousness that have enough power to create worlds, right? And if
Right.
we're all that almighty aspect in its fractal nature experiencing itself, there's different degrees of orientation that one can remember in that original delineation point where we left source, and the different kind of mystery schools that we pass through as souls. So a lot of beings have passed through very advanced schools in the universe, came to Earth to assist this experiment, and are waking up the memory of that. And so they remember being in Sirius and agreeing to come down to Earth. They remember being from wherever they were in the universe, or from the angelic realms of unified consciousness, of love, light, and an infinite knowing, and then descending into this place of density
Right.
also has multidimensionality simultaneously, because
Right.
it's baked into the nature of it.
Right.
I call Earth the sideshow freak of the galaxy. I was actually just thinking about that this morning because I'm dealing with stuff right now, and it's like we're all leveling up, and these old timelines test us, and they try to like kind of draw you back, and it's a big test, and there's lessons in it, and I'm like,
Yeah,
why am I being tempted in these areas, and like how is my body feeling? Like you
right,
said something like I don't even know how you worded it at the beginning about this density test or something, and I was like, I feel that. That's kind of what I'm experiencing
right,
now, and but as you start to break through, like you're gonna constantly be tested and pulled back, and if you're not self-aware, you could easily fall back into the same pattern. So you talking about living the same life 600 times just for one lesson or whatever that
sure.
was. I
Yeah,
feel that. I feel
right.
that.
And we're in that time where those kinds of lessons are available week to week, day to day, relationally, like through the mirror of community. You're accessing a past life through this one relationship soul contract, where you wouldn't have had any memory of Atlantis or any memory of Lemuria or any memory of whatever continent and cultural, framework, unless you met that soul contract, which triggers that, puts the key right into your DNA and unlocks it. And even though it's uncomfortable and confronting, they're actually catalyzing an opportunity for karmic absolution and karmic resolution. So we have these sort of destiny threads of different beings that are meant to come into our life and catalyze some kind of growth. Now, you can look at that from a very grounded level of the psychology of development, and you're playing out some kind of wounding with somebody, and they get projected onto, and they project onto you, and you heal that way. But there's also, from my experience, very real incarnational soul contracts where you're like, you meet someone and you have no idea why you love each other so much or hate each other so much. And if they're also self-aware enough, like I've had relationships where we track this stuff and we clear it and we're better. We're like, oh my God, like we cleared those 5, whatever. And in my own healing practice, like I've had clients, like I had like this like kind of famous yoga teacher who was really like powerful and very in like a very good balance of her masculine and feminine, and she was so seeped in clearly a reincarnation of some kind of yogi, but she couldn't get over this ex-boyfriend. And so we went to her Akash and we found this vow that she had made to this person's soul in a past life, which was like, I will follow you through the depths of hell and heaven and find you in every lifetime and like never let you. It was like, geez, that's an intense vow. Once we cleared that vow, we collapsed that timeline. She was over him and met her now husband 2 weeks later, because she made space in her field and she collapsed that Akashic record from having any energetic weight.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. Aaron, do you have any questions for him before I ask him about Atlantis?
There's about a million questions and directions we could go from here. Um, so I guess we could talk about the past life topic. So you said you had some intense experiences during one of your near death where you were waking up as like a different past life and a different era and type of being. So what do you think? Because like a lot of people, obviously, a lot of us don't know of our past lives or don't even believe in past lives, right? Do you think the universe kind of brings that in at a certain time where it needs something like you said needs to be cleared, or we need to pick up something from a past life?
I
Or
think
do you think every person should even know about past lives,
I
or is
think
it?
some souls, that's not their contract to remember it. It's not relevant for them to fulfill their soul mission. It's like, it would
Mhm.
be a distraction. I think
Right,
some people go to past lives because they want to feel special and they want
right,
to like, I was Cleopatra, and it's like, yeah,
right. There's a
but
lot of ego. There's
you
a lot
were
of ego.
also a slave, or you were also the enslaver. A lot of us that are very old souls that have a role to play in this ascension, we've been all of it. We've been on the light, we've been in the dark, and it's more about taking self-responsibility for the impact of your choices through all space-time experiences that matters. Like, can you reconcile the impact of your choices then, now?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what actually matters.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I agree. I think
I totally agree.
we've all experienced the light and the dark in those lifetimes, and I think that's how you even become a master. Not that we're like trying to become a master in like a egoic sense, but when you truly understand like the concepts that we're discussing, I feel like you've walked the path of dark and light to get there. And
yeah,
I think that's an important thing to recognize, and that's also helps you practice non-judgment when you see it in others because you understand that process.
absolutely. And it dismantles the superiority of being a light worker that can happen. It's like, yeah, you've also been a dark worker, bro. You
Right,
just don't remember that lifetime where, you
right,
know, like how manipulative you actually were, and how many feminine energies you were harvesting. Like, come on. And they're still in that pattern on an unconscious level. I've seen it. And
Right.
so it's again, it's more about, again, it's parallel lifetimes. It's not actually past. They're
right,
parallel timeline experiences, as I call them. And we can learn about, you can learn everything about your past lives just by paying very close attention to this one.
Yeah, I
Most
love
of us,
that.
our parents have given us our karma on a silver platter to clean up. Like all the genealogy, all the ancestral wounds, everything. It's just like, here you go. Here's all your karma.
Right.
And
And
if
you know
you
Right.
what?
really pay attention, you'll learn about your past lives one way or another without the glamour. Because I feel grateful that I've had the glamorous side of it, but it didn't necessarily make anything easier. It's just because that's the role that I have to play with helping souls clean some of this stuff up. It's not like,
Right.
you
Right.
know,
Because I've heard a lot of people say that they remember their past lives. They remember going through the same types of experiences that they're having in this life,
sure.
but they like didn't pass the lesson and
Oh
and
my
they're
God.
giving another opportunity
Oh
to
God.
graduate from that lesson in this
That's
life.
scary. It's scary. I remember I had one, it was like 2011, same year that I got, no, the year after that I got taken out of body. Anyway, it was at some point in that same sort of year cycle. And I remember getting eaten by a crocodile in Egypt in the first gate of initiation when you're supposed to swim underneath them and master
Mhm.
your fear. And I panicked and I got eaten.
Yeah.
And I remember that. And I remember feeling all this shame that like, and all of a sudden I was literally I was being given the same exact lesson without needing a crocodile
Hmm.
like initiation to get the mastery over the fear in that form, right?
Really?
So
Right. Right.
because it will come in other ways, and we get the opportunity to overcome it without it being as dramatic.
Well,
Right.
talking
Exactly.
about repeating lessons, let's talk about Atlantis and how, okay, we can talk about Atlantis
Good
was in the
segue. Good
past,
segue,
or
bro.
it's
Good segue. Yeah.
right, okay, Atlantis was a past civilization, in the past, right? But it's also simultaneous, and
Yeah.
we're reliving that same lesson right now. And I think this is our opportunity to do something different. And you broke down the downfall of Atlantis through your memory on the Jeff Mara podcast. So I was wondering if you could maybe share that memory again, and then we can go from there as far as how that
Yeah.
lesson is showing up.
Yeah, I mean, so basically Atlantis got infiltrated. There was a golden age to Atlantis at one point where we had crystalline technology and we were in a very deep multidimensional initiatic high priest like priesthood, like very distributed governance model and living as in like almost an near ascended level civilization. And it got infiltrated. And in the infiltration, a power over structure was incepted, which started to create competition and started to create a power wobble. And eventually, the misuse of power happened, and there was a fracturing of tribal warfare that happened inside of these governing bodies to the point where the technology and the power struggle got so strong that the energies that required a type of consciousness to hold it together cracked, and the fabric of um, the consciousness required to hold it basically was dismantled and it collapsed. And the collapse was quite cataclysmic. And so I remember this is also like after like maybe 9 months into 2020 or a year, maybe it was 2021, that I had a karmic contract with a woman that I was in a union with there. And it and our separating the fracturing of it triggered that Atlantean timeline. And I saw who all, like a lot of our soul group was like a lot of different players and like and in a session that I was receiving, I remembered accessing because I was like feeling a lot of this like, oh man, like we have a whole tribe around us and like this is affecting them, this breakup, and there was like all these different layers to it. And then I remembered, yeah, I remember the whole scene. And so the whole thing that went down was like there was a bunch of us that were like, we need to leave. This is not our way. We can't be fighting. Like we just have to leave. Like we need to leave. Like it's gonna get bad. And those of us that were choosing to leave were actually we made a pact to take different teachings to different sections of the land masses that we retreated to that would became the world that we know it now. So a lot of us were carrying the seed blueprint of a whole new sort of mystery school, the 13 mystery schools that came post Atlantis. We became the ones of us that left Atlantis became founders of these different cultures. And I was specifically in charge of the founding of the druid sort of druidic mystery school. And yeah, my ex-partner and the woman in this lifetime, she was like, you're a coward for leaving, you need to stay and fight. And I was like, this isn't our way. And I was like kind of heartbroken that I had to step away. and we were on boats. And then as we were even on the boats, that's when like the cataclysm happened. And like we all had to grieve all our friends and family that all went down in that sort of, collapse. And then, when I was in Ireland last year, some shards of that memory came back, and even reading the mythology of the Tuatha De Danann, and that like Ireland was like right near that landmass, and like the whole mythology of the Tuatha De Danann were definitely like Atlantean beings that were founding the Druid mystery school. So I a lot of these things kind of were like they're like little constellations that you fill in the dots, and they get stitched together over sometime over 5 years for me. But this is something that happened to me years ago, and I'm only now seeing actually evidence of it in mythology of like how close Atlantis was to Celtic lore and then other lore. And so anyway, yeah, so that was painful. And what's unresolved now is the unresolved Atlantean karma, power over, technology, fame seeking, and money, greed. They're all part of the same power over system, hierarchical systems that are power over. And that exists in the spiritual community very strongly as well.
Right.
People competing to be the most notarized, or they're in this unconscious agenda of social hierarchy, being the most, it's Luciferic ultimately, because it's false light. It's not actually integrated with Christ consciousness. It's not actually integrated with the deep shadow work. It's positioning itself as something where it's not actually doing the inner accountability work of taking responsibility for the shadow aspects. And so I've met a lot of these really interesting, very powerful, very well-intended, but very self-deceived spiritual beings that are playing out very strong. And a lot of it's, I see it in like the coaching community, I see it in the medicine community, I see it in the personal development community of like, oh, like wow, that person's running a lot of unresolved Atlantean karma, and they're like really, a lot of these are going to be the people that you'll hear like a hit story about them in the next 2 years about sleeping with too many women or abusing their power or whatever. These are a lot of the Atlantean sort of players that were unwilling to clean up the karma. And then, some of them, I've seen some of them also clean it up. It's like, okay, maybe ketamine's a bad idea,
Right.
Maybe all this money should come into relationship with indigenous people and not just like position us endlessly up the pyramid. Like let's collapse it and make it more circular economies, so and the craziest thing that I've learned, and this is from a mentor and memory combo, was that in Atlantis, when it got infiltrated, one of the first things it did was conquer Lemuria. They were actually existing simultaneously. So the fall of the Lemurian Empire happened during the reign of Atlantis. And Lemuria's vibration was so much higher, but they both inhabited the Earth plane at the same time at one point. And how Atlantis infiltrated Lemuria was through like a very advanced technology. And it was designed to collapse divine unions. So Lemuria was a whole divine union civilization. So a lot of our deep trauma of separation from the masculine or feminine stems back to the fall of Lemuria from these same kind of power over systems that are in place now. That's an echo of it. And that has to do with the porn industry and porn indoctrination. That has to do with a lot of like false angelic, like spiritual teachings, Luciferic teachings. And they're kind of like little traps in consciousness that when you access a new realm of multidimensional power, you're like, ooh, like I want more power or whatever. And it's like, oh, you just hooked into this little trap in consciousness that's designed to like loop you in that Atlantean karma. And it's kind of like in the Dark Crystal, that kind of mythology of like, they were the same founders, and some of them became the Skeksis and some of them became the mystics. But in the end, they have to return into the oneness again and repair the crystal. It's like, we have so much awesome mythology around this stuff in our cultures.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I absolutely love that, how you broke that down, the unresolved Atlantean karma that some of these spiritual gurus and, galactic ambassadors, whoever it may be, like the hierarchy is still there, and it's very important to them that they're looked up to and put on a pedestal. And a lot of people take the bait, and we see this happen time and time again. And Exactly. There'll be a hit piece or whatever it is, and there's some people that you wonder if they'll even figure it out in this lifetime, and then there's other people you think,
Yeah.
okay, I can see that this this is salvageable, right? This person can find his way or her way, and
Totally.
I love that you brought that up because also something that you offer, I heard you mention at the end of the Jeff Mara podcast was that I don't know if it's a course or something, but you do this thing where you teach people how to vet energy healers. And maybe you can expand on that a little bit because I think that's one of the most important things is like
Yeah.
vetting these people, right?
Well, I'm co-founding a thing called the Institute of Energetics. So I actually have a co-founder. We're creating a whole healer marketplace where we're going to be vetting healers so that people can go to a trusted energy healer through our platform. Personally, I've been in the work for 20 years and I've seen that like a healthy spiritual teacher or a healthy healer, they're not taking responsibility for the one that's healing you. They're assisting you in healing yourself. If they take too much credit for it, you could see their kind of the pride or the ego of like, I'm the one doing it. Red flag. If they don't have a sense of humor, if they're not honest about their own flaws, like I share with my clients and my community and online, I'm very transparent that like I'm human. I got stuff I'm working on. I'm not completely resolved. I'm not like, completely
Yeah.
enlightened being. I have really amazing gifts and I can tap into a stream of mastery when I work with someone. But part of my mastery is to unlock other people's mastery. It's not to create a dependency on me. Like
Yeah.
I'm here to graduate as many people as possible. And so a lot of the false light energy healers, it's very hierarchical and there's a lot of harvesting of resources and energy and to keep them kind of like endlessly enrolled in some kind of funnel of some sort. They don't have a sense of humor. There's usually some kind of misaligned sexual energy. Like there's a lot of red flags to look for. And this is across the board from money coaches, to tantra teachers, to there's indigenous elders that are abusing their sexual power. It doesn't just because they're indigenous or just because they're still human beings. And if they're not honest about their humanity, I wouldn't work with them personally.
Beautifully said. I
Yeah,
absolutely love
very well
that.
said.
I
You
mean,
can feel the parasitic energy coming from these types of people if you're in a healthy place. But a
Right.
lot of times
A lot of people aren't.
the
Yeah.
people that are attracted to these people are not in a health, and that's why they're attracted to them in the first place.
Right.
And then they just feed off of other followers, and it's like
Totally.
this. It's like a trauma bond on a large scale,
It's
right? It's like a
deep. Oh,
narcissist empath trauma bond on a grand scale, where
it's
it's
real.
like they're the
Yeah.
narcissist and they have all these people they're feeding on that they keep
Right.
in their web all the
And
time.
a lot of the spiritual communities, because there isn't a type of ethics or sense-making relational village fabric in place, it's a lot about spiritual narcissism reinforcing spiritual narcissism. So a lot of narcissists or covert narcissists hang out in these communities because they are really good at actually enabling that behavior. And so
Mhm.
I think we're going to see over the next 3 to 5 years a fracturing of different types of spiritual communities of where there's more accountability in place, there's more groundedness getting introduced, like that you're going to see this kind of like difference between like the false light side of things and where the people that are actually committed to doing the real work and having relational accountability and having more elders involved and youth and like, okay, we're going to be raising children together. We can't like, do you really want to be doing ketamine all the time? Or do you want to be doing hop A every 5 minutes? Like, what's the culture we actually want to create? And so there's a fracturing in the whole scene right now because we come from fractured cultures of indigeneity. We've lost place. We don't know who our ancestors are. So that's like, for those that are really interested in healing, one of the most powerful things you can do is start to investigate your own ancestry and start to get back through your lineage and find the trauma, the generational trauma, because it's really, for me, the trauma work is where all these multidimensional concepts, all the beauty of mysticism, because I love it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love it. But where it starts to hit the ground in a new way is where we address the trauma, where we get into the minutia of the unglamorous, identity stripping, hard shadow work, where we have to be with parts of ourselves that we've avoided sometimes through lifetimes.
right.
Deep grief,
Right.
deep shame, deep rage, deep, whatever, unlovability, unworthiness, any of that stuff that we avoid at all costs. And a lot of spirituality becomes a replacement for an even more nuanced way of hiding behind,
Right.
that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah,
spiritual
and it's like,
bypassing it
yeah,
instead of
spiritual.
actually healing it, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Spiritual bypassing. And through healing the trauma though, that's how you unlock the DNA and activate
Definitely.
and remember and tap into your multidimensional self, right? And then understand things through a grander perspective. But if you're still holding on to that trauma, and this is another thing about trauma that I realized when I was writing my book is it's actually important for some people to remember their parallel lives, past lives, because
Probably
it
there.
because if there's trauma that needs to be resolved but it's untraceable, then you're never going to resolve it. And that's
Right.
why it's important to tap into these other lifetimes and these other versions of yourself. And even though like that timeline may have collapsed and that memory might be gone,
So it could show up in the etheric body as a scar.
exactly, it can show up somehow. And now that trauma becomes traceable again and you can identify its point of origin and then you can move past it.
You see it in some media, you see it in science now more and more as they study this phenomena of like a freaking savant kid who could play the piano like Mozart at 3, but also has a very strange fear of heights or water, or it's like
Right.
why do we have these strange phobias that have nothing to do with anything that we've actually experienced in this lifetime, or weird scars or birthmarks of an entry wound of a bullet. Like there's so much cool literature out there around people that have actually studied this phenomena. There's even a cool movie, I forget the name of it, but like he goes to India, he loses his partner in like an elevator shaft, and then finds this little girl that has the same eyes, and she has a fear of elevators. And it's like this really deep, I forgot the name of that movie. It was one of the most profound, like science and spirituality. Like he's rational and he's trying to solve it through this scientific thing, but then it's like this unexplainable phenomena. And we're in that time as well. Like that's also where the break off in Atlantis happened, is that science and spirituality were one. Our
Mhm.
sciences at one point were astrology, were quantum physics, like, and versus like what we have now, which is like this like Newtonian like indoctrination template of
Yeah.
inanimacy, and that's like de-animatizing a living universe. It's
Nothing
not
exists
it's
beyond
not
the five
science.
senses.
Yeah, it's not science.
Right.
It's not real science.
Right.
It's a framework of indoctrination, where
It's a
every
religion.
nation had their science was about understanding the nature of the universe and how it
Mhm.
works, which is inherently spiritual. So they weren't separate.
Right.
So
Right.
post Atlantis fall, when the next wave of like off-planet influences came in, um, and there was the next like Rome and that kind of colonization trauma, which is also past life and also generational. Like the world we've inherited is generational wounding from Rome. So that
Right.
you could say that's past life, but it's also just actual like linear trauma as well.
Right.
This is where the
Right.
cool intersection point is between like the multidimensional timeline stuff and like the very real generational trauma from Rome, because we like that's what colonized the world, and the false sciences that came were post Rome.
Right.
Exactly.
There's so many interesting points here. For one, the science and spirituality, obviously, right? I spoke at the Star Knowledge conference last year, and one of the elders was talking about the breakthroughs in technology that he was seeing on the internet. And he was telling the audience, he's like, we've known this the
Done
whole
this forever.
time. We've been trying to tell you guys, like,
Right. Right.
and but and it's like this isn't a breakthrough.
This is not
This
new
isn't,
information
yeah. And it's
at
so
all.
funny because he was giving examples of like the articles and stuff. And it's funny because in the world, like if you're not privy to that, right? You're not in that world, it just looks like an amazing technological breakthrough. But it's just old. It's like these people are coming back online and these memories, the collective is catching on, which
It is.
which brings me to my next point. I'd love you to expand on if you could. Right now, okay, moving forward into the future, there's a clear bifurcation, right? There's this split happening, and there's these two timelines with however you want to perceive it, right? What does the future look like in your eyes? Because I'm of the belief that like we can choose one or the other, whether consciously or unconsciously. And like the way we pursue our life, our daily life, is how we're going to create our future.
Yeah, I mean, I resonate with the bifurcation sort of Celestine prophecy kind of idea on one level. Another level, I wonder if it's an inception to create passivity and hopeful thinking
Right.
versus like practical, grounded preparation for what also might happen. And I don't think it's just two timelines. I think there's multiple potential timelines right now, and we're in a timeline flux over the next 2 years. as we approach what human design founder Ra called the rise of the sleeping phoenix, what a lot of indigenous prophecies are talking about. 2027 is a kind of that we could call a bifurcation year, but I don't know if it's actually going to manifest as a bifurcation or not. It could also just be multiple places simultaneously existing. Just like right now, some people say, oh, we're in the Kali Yuga, but then you're in like a Sat Yuga like experience. You're in like a heaven on earth kind of place, paradise, and people are really in their hearts. And then there's a war happening simultaneously. So it's like, is it a bifurcation, or is it just like different sections that are going to be having different experiences? I don't know. It could be a full bifurcation. What I do feel and sense and trust is I track the agendas in consciousness. And I do think that, and I've had elders and I've had mentors mention this, like one of my mentors said that 1/3 of the planet's going to check out a body. They're just going to go the spirit world. They've maxed out on the capacity to reach all their lessons. They're gonna transition. So it's gonna be like 1/3 of the planet's gonna actually check out. 1/3 is gonna sort of merge with technology and play that whole transhumanist thing, and 1/3 is gonna do the organic ascension path, clean up the DNA, unlock the light body, and go into the ancient future timeline that our like higher selves have like set as a blueprint of a golden timeline for us to live into, and that's like full potential in consciousness, like crystalline DNA, like things beyond our wildest conception, technology being a reflection of our consciousness and spirituality, and so, or it could be a combination of both simultaneously. Like you might have a section of the population that's all like weird cyborg, like trying to achieve immortality externally, right? Like the Luciferic experiment, and then the percentage of the population is achieving immortality through the knowledge of the immortal nature of the soul. And that might not equal physical immortality, but it is the immortality through, there's no more separation between the truth of who you are and your immortal soul that's never died, never born, exists infinitum.
Right.
And being able to live into that sort of graduation of the full ascension pathway of the self-realized being. And that all the physical experiences that we're having right now as a planetary consciousness, like all the material that we have to look at, is all there to catalyze and churn stuff up so that we can clean up the karma, and it's speeding up our ascension. So all the really challenging, scary, confronting, relational, geopolitical, ecological, all that stuff is catalyzing the cleanup that we need to do inside of our own work to then potentially shift into a planetary awakening or a partial planetary awakening. We don't know yet. That's what the next 2 years will determine, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more, actually.
Absolutely.
I love how you broke that down, and especially like the different areas, like I call it pocket realities. Like all these people are going to start their own pocket realities based on the collective belief of that tribe that gathers
Right.
in that location, because maybe it's a sacred site that's coming back online.
Right.
And so that world for them, their consensus reality is going to create something completely different than what's happening on the other side of the world.
Right.
And maybe like ultimately there will be some split or some grander thing, but it's going to branch off into like an infinite amount of possibilities, I think.
At some point, nature is going to take over again, because power over doesn't work. The Tao tells us this. The dam breaks, the water flows out. The catalyzing moment that the so-called elites can't control either. Like something will happen that like interrupts the illusion of control for all those that are playing that out, and something tips us into that point where we have to get with the current or not. And I think there's the individual, tribal, and collective versions of those kinds of initiations where you're like, oh, I don't have control, but I can respond,
Right.
And so there's something in that flux period right now where we know the dark sorcerer style of the so-called elites are trying to hijack the imagination of the collective so that we dream that world into being for them. So the idea is, if people are awake in their co-creative capacity, multidimensionally online, creating consensus reality, as you call it, in islands of coherence, of shared reality, holding our boundaries, healing ourselves, so we don't need to play out that wound with some geopolitical structure anymore. Because they're like, no, like you just can't do that anymore, bro. Like, no, and so enough people have to find that no, and there's some version of the population that are they're like, no, and they have to go through like the most extreme no, where others are just like, no. Like
Right.
that their no is just like in their field, and other people, their no is like making up for hundreds of years of being violated, of
Right.
like their no never existed. And so they have to go the complete other spectrum of reclaiming their no. Right. So it like
Right.
you'll have these varying beings going through some kind of karma purifying or trauma purifying process that looks maybe really messy from the outside based on what's happening in that region of consciousness or that station in creation, but ultimately it's moving us towards a collective remembrance of like we're not separate from nature. Nature's running the show, and the ones that are trying to manipulate consciousness and get humanity to dream their world into being, they're going to have their reckoning point, and everything they're doing to try to control actually speeds up the collective awakening.
Yes.
So evil sows the seed of its own demise. And if
Exactly.
you move into fight, you are now on their terms.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then you're in the density where they have reign. But as multidimensional beings, we have to vibrate higher and do our work. We don't enter the fray. We have to focus on creating something new, not fighting the old.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a
Beautiful.
gray area where we have to set boundaries. So now you got to set a boundary. It's like, no, you know, don't tread on me. Like that, there might be pockets where like some gangster shit goes on. I don't know, you know,
Right.
but I prefer to give my energy to building the new and orient and take responsibility for my lineage trauma of where I can move into a fear or like, oh, interesting. My fear came after I watched that conspiracy video. That might have an etheric implant in it. Let me clear that implant. Now I'm not vibrating in that same fear. Like it is a spiritual warfare game that happens on a multidimensional level. So we got to learn. You have to learn how to become your own shaman and work with energy and move emotional energy and move in those spaces so that there isn't places for those kind of dark timelines to hook into your field.
Look into you. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, that's beautiful. I love what you said, especially about watching a conspiracy video and receiving an etheric implant. Can you expand on that, please?
Well, I mean, a lot of these things are psyops, man. They know they want the light workers vibrating super low and in fear to create their world because that's how powerful we actually are. We're a percentage of the planet. The masses are going to go along for whatever ride we go along, and some of them can tip it to an awakened state and be like, "Oh my God, I'm not an NPC. I'm a soul, and I have choices." Versus the default programming I've been on for the last 25 years of just indoctrination and automation and subconscious wounding and you know being like a semi human, you know, just functioning behind the mask and in survival. People are going to get pop like popcorn pop out of that for different reasons. Someone they love dies. They have an insight. Life isn't permanent. Oh my God. 9/11 video. Oh shit. Our governments don't actually care about us. Like whatever the catalyst is to wake them up out of the dream state, you know, it's going to be what it's going to be, you know? And so but those energies that want to hijack the imagination of humanity, they're getting less and less permission by the nature of the evolving timeline to do shit physically. So they have to do it spiritually, they have to do it through media, they have to do it. And so some sorcery is at work. And that looks like doing like an etheric implant inside of a conspiracy video that's like a trap in consciousness. And when you watch it, that that hooks into your field. And I've seen it in like the first Doctor Strange was amazing. It had transmission. The second one had some dark implants, and I had to like clear my field after watching it. I'm sensitive to feel that
Right.
as a 20-year energy worker and Akashic reader. I'm like, ooh, well, like I could feel it after I like get out. I'm like, what is that? And I go in and I check in. I'm like, oh, I picked up 2 implants from that movie.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's another thing I kind of cover in my book. I don't really refer to them as implants, but I understand like how those frequencies can open portals and allow attachments and stuff like that. It's a similar concept, but it's all like more evidence of this spiritual warfare that's at our doorstep. And as we, like
Right.
I said earlier, as we begin to break through, you're constantly like reinforcements are going to be sent in to try and keep you at bay. And that's the test, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And not going into victimization, perpetration, or rescuing. That's how we pop out. And that's the most seductive thing for all of us as human beings. That's samsara in a nutshell.
Right.
Am I going into rescuing? Am I so victimized I'm now turning perpetrator? Like if we look at what's happening in the Middle East, there's all these different flavors of where we play out a pattern of either victim, perpetrator, or rescuer.
Right.
And that is the cycle that we need to break to create the golden timeline.
Right. Yeah. If you're in
Right.
a victimhood mentality, you can easily become exactly what you can become the perpetrator. You can become exactly what you've been
Mhm.
fighting the whole
and
time.
feel
That's what
justified in
Right.
doing it.
that's what
Right.
happens. That's
Yeah.
why you see people, you're like, oh my gosh, how can that person do that? How can they be so evil? Well, when
Been abused
you
so
hear
much,
their
but
backstory for the first time, you're like, oh, that was done to them. Oh, that person's dad did that to them, or whatever. It's passed down. The victim becomes the victimizer until somebody says the buck stops here and heals,
it's
stops the
the
cycle.
most subtle yet profound part of the healing journey that I've discovered is working with that framework and where I could take responsibility for all three of those aspects because I had all I'm still working some of that my victim out. I'm still working out moments of perpetration of where my because of my street like my gang history want to move towards like a violent
Mhm.
or like a violent thought a violent thought form. I wouldn't like act on it, but even that there's some level of reactivity, and some of
Right.
those thought
Right.
forms are not even ours. We're just picking up the channel,
No.
Yep.
so like
Right.
we have to become masters of discernment, which is actually a chamber of the heart, not the mind.
Right.
So when we open the heart more and more through whatever alchemical practices, whether it's bhakti yoga and chanting, whether that's psychotherapeutic work and shadow work, whatever you can do to open your heart, that's where the chamber of discernment and compassion lives. Compassion is the number one tool we have as light workers to traverse this time, and that means compassion for your own humanity, compassion for others. That locks you into soul frequency, compassion, and then also discernment, hummingbird. Um,
Nice.
discernment is we've had discernment and intuition beaten out of us generationally through indoctrination. And
Right.
so
Right.
whatever helps you reclaim discernment and intuition is going to be how you survive this multidimensional warfare timeline split that we're in.
Right.
And there's lots of little inceptions. You can go down the endless ayahuasca, end up in become like a little insect with a shriveled liver. You can go into the born again cult. You can go, it's like you got a
Mhm.
million different choices. But if you can take self-responsibility for your victim perpetrator and your rescuer and start to heal the generational trauma, you're going to reawaken your heart's energy to have discernment, intuition, compassion. You'll be able to start to metabolize the energy better that's coming for us because of things are only going to ramp up from here on out.
Yeah.
And the grace does too. And the oh my God, you're one of my people. I can like actually cry with you safely. Like those people also show up. So we're always given exactly what we can handle.
Right.
Um, and so,
Exactly.
I, I,
um, yeah,
I'd like to ask, and maybe we can close out on this, but this is something I encountered with two different people very recently. Just having conversations about stuff that obviously is pushing the boundaries of their belief. And I've come across two people with religious backgrounds that don't believe in karma, and they're like, "No, I don't believe in karma." And I find that such a curious thing. So like, I don't know what's being taught in
very
these.
convenient.
Yeah, I don't know what's being taught in these churches, but I'm like, you don't believe that like you reap what you sow, or like what does that mean? You just get a
That's a
free
literal interpretation of karma.
right? Yeah, yeah,
Right.
but I mean, like, so what do I don't understand if these people think that they just get a free pass to be a shitty person now. Like, I don't like where's this belief like
Well,
coming
part of
from?
the part of the born again distortion is that there's a self to save. So they create a new identity that's saved, but still an identity.
Right.
Okay, yeah,
It's
that answers
outsourcing.
it.
It's outsourcing safety. Now Christ is real, and Christ is a powerful ascended master, and Christ has
Hmm.
codes for healing karma. But there's also really good demonic healers out there. People that are demonic, like John of God
John of God. Yeah.
was like trafficking children and miracle healing people.
Right.
So people
Right.
are like, oh my God, I was like miraculously healed. And it's like, okay, what soul fragment just got eaten by whatever fucking, dark morphogen, the thing that's like hooking into the collective field that you're now absorbed into.
Right.
It's like,
Right. All you see are people are just wowed by what they see on the surface of like, oh
yeah.
wow, he has
And,
powers, he's
and because
amazing.
because
No,
the
it doesn't
false
all.
light's so gnarly right now, and people are going through disillusionment of our spiritual community because there's a lot of half-baked, predatorial. Like I get why people are doing it. I actually have a lot
Right.
of compassion. I have so many friends that are gone born again, and it's like, yeah, it's more wholesome. Honestly, it's more wholesome than this other shit. I get it, bro. All the best to you. That's the path you chose. I wish you well. We're probably not gonna be friends anymore. because of
Right.
whatever. But
There's a lot of black magic too that's disguised as spiritual things.
yeah,
So real quick, it reminds me of the show Supernatural. I don't know if you've ever watched that show. It's it's I think I love it, but there's a lot of disclosure in that as a lot of things. And one episode, there's a guy they find who he's actually healing people. He's
mm,
healing them. And they're
mm,
like, "Oh my God, you're amazing, you're a healer," But what no one knows is that he's doing black magic secretly that someone else has to die for that
yeah.
person to be healed every time when he does the black magic.
This is the brujeria we call it in this in the shamanic lineages. Like, just because indigenous doesn't mean it's safe. Like there's
Mhm.
crazy astral density in some of these tribal cultures, and there's also ones that are lit that never got colonized and hold a purity and understanding in the mythology of creation of where we all come from, still have the star knowledge, and then you have the others that like are competing and jealous and in full shamanic spiritual warfare with each other. So like I get, it's like everyone wants to be a shaman and their mother now that don't know the spiritual consequences of entering into type of an astral fray. And there's a lot of people that are turning born again right now. They're just like, oh my God, I was getting psychically attacked all the time. And, it's like new age spirituality, just like this endless roller coaster of healing. It's like, we just weren't ready to take self-responsibility for certain things. And like, it is hard. It is unglamour. There's like really existentially painful moments. And so I totally have empathy for someone that just wants to be saved. And like, I'm fucking tired of healing because there's traps in consciousness where you will endlessly loop in your trauma and not actually heal it and just
Right.
feed that identity.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
there's traps in religion, there's traps in new age spirituality, there's traps laid for us in consciousness. Again, it takes good mentorship, it takes good intuition, discernment, compassion to be able to traverse the razor's edge of the times that we're in.
Right.
And there's no
Yeah.
one size fits all for any of us.
At the end of the day, it always comes back to, are you giving your power away to whether it's a religion or a belief system or a guru or anything,
It's
or are you taking your power back and using the things outside of you as tools to become the master and to grow spiritually and heal? But what happens is everyone, the ego and the wounded ego and the wounds trap us in like you said, either you're a victim, I need saving by something outside of me, or it's the opposite of that, which is just the other side of
you're
the
trying to save
coin.
others, and that's
I'm gonna save you, I'm gonna save others, right? It's
so
just,
I'll break down the 5 principles of integrated spirituality that I talk about and that I'm integrating into my body of work. And it's, do you have vices? And what are you doing to transmute those vices to cultivate virtues? Spirituality is meant to cultivate virtue.
mhm.
So spirituality without ethics is just about spiritual identity. So your spirituality needs to nourish actual morality and ethics. So if there's like a lineage and there's no ethics, probably not legit, right? So
Right.
what feelings are you avoiding? What feelings are you taking self-responsibility for? Spirituality should help you have, and healing should help you have more tools to be with the hurt feelings that are hard to be with, that are uncomfortable to sit with and cook in, address. Effective grieving is a part of healing. And if you don't have tools to effectively grieve, you'll find something else to be a replacement for effective grieving. So these are like some of the foundational principles of like healthy integrated spirituality is it taking me deeper into my body and helping me access the feelings that I've suppressed? Am I turning my vices into virtues? Am I transmuting the trauma and on my generations by taking self-responsibility for my choices? Am I in an honest relationship with the impact of my choices on my relationships? Things like that. Like, we got to find a way to be in the world and also still develop the mysticism so that it's not just like a way to hide out or a way to bedazzle other people and avoid ourselves. So
Right.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta be careful. Like, well, going back to the consciousness trap thing, this is another thing I write about in my book. Those consciousness traps will last forever if you're
oh
not.
yeah, you can endlessly loop to the end of time if you don't
Exactly.
Right.
And that's the whole goal of these, you know, the dark forces, right? They place these distractions in your life to keep you on the lower timeline. So you make those choices every day that keep you bathing in those
Yeah.
frequencies that keep you in that trap. And
So
it's go ahead.
what are some of those traps?
Well, I mean, put me on the spot here. A consciousness, I don't know. You tell me.
Lust,
Right, lust. There you go. Thank you.
greed.
Right,
These are vices.
right.
The way that those things could hook in, it might look through this glamorous thing of like, oh yeah, she's a tantric dakini, you know, sex healer.
Hmm.
But is
Right.
there an unconscious agenda to like, what's really going on? You know what I mean? It looks as this like looks nice, but
Yeah.
there's lust frequency at the end of it. And we know what happens when you enter into the lust frequency. You're gonna be paying with your life force right into the matrix.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the example I use in my book. I just couldn't answer you on the spot there, but I use the relationships at this relationship that I was in personally that involved lust. And it was very much, I mistaked it for
Still
love.
healing that.
Right? I was mistaking it for love, actually. And it was like this fixation. And actually, I was under a spell. But at the end of the day, it was really a consciousness trap. But there was a lot of there was a lot of factors at play that I never even would have recognized had I not been in it. So I had to be in it to recognize it. And now I can identify that moving forward. And once
Yeah.
you're aware, then you can navigate that because, and you're like, it'll be less
Yep.
effective next time because they will try again, but now you know what to look for.
You've
You know what a
grown
great
now.
consciousness trap is? Twin flames.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, oh,
I use that
oh,
exact
yes.
example too. Right. Yeah.
Now I can spot a trauma bond from a mile away.
Right.
Right. Exactly.
I
And
really
then,
appreciate you naming that vulnerably for yourself, man. Like I realized that I replaced love with lust when I was indoctrinated into foreign culture at 12 years old, you know? And that's something I'm cleaning up now, you know?
right. Right.
It's an
And,
example of a consciousness trap
yeah,
Right. Why
because
do you
exactly.
think it's
there's actual energies behind those systems of hypersexualization that are trying to prevent divine union on this planet. Let's keep all the spiritual men stuck in the looking for the female gaze, not able to commit to one being, so that they never enter divine union and bring us like a high being down to the planet through high alchemical sacred sexual magic, and just get swirled in the poly tantra bullshit. Like that,
Right.
there's
right?
entities behind it that want spiritual community doing all that shit.
Oh,
Right.
exactly. And
Right.
I I break this down, but it's like, okay, they exploit, like sometimes it'll be a real connection that you'll have with somebody that it might be a trauma bond that you could maybe get past, right? But I think they'll exploit a connection also to loose harvest off of that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I've been there.
right, yeah, exactly. So they'll exploit it, but in a way that it's like you always like to me, I wonder, well, what would have happened if it wasn't being exploited? Well, what would we have gone past that, you know?
Yeah, but that kind of wishful thinking still ignores the day-to-day lived reality of being in a relationship with someone that's not a correct match.
Right, right. Yeah,
But and it's because your vibration drops in that kind of trauma bond and the addiction to the kind of sexual intensity that happens through those things, that attracts entities, that attracts that kind of grid.
right,
So you're co-creating it. It's not like you're a victim of it and the bad forces are, it's just like that's baked into the entire equation.
right. And you know, another layer to this though is like we see it depicted in movies like I'll just use The Matrix as a good example. The very last one, there's four of them. The fourth one, they they explain this in great detail. So Neo and Trinity, they're like these like sacred
Yeah,
lovers, right?
yeah.
And they realize in the movie that together they're detrimental to the dark because they're very powerful.
Mhm.
But if
Yep.
he figured out that if he can keep them just far enough, but to
Yep.
remain like this slightly connected, they could exploit that connection and use it to their advantage. So
Feed
Right.
off the
that's
energy that it creates.
yeah,
The
Yeah,
yeah. So I feel like that's happening with a lot of people.
that's valid. That's
Yeah,
valid. And the version of those people, it's their unresolved work that has them in like a conventional, like, oh, it's safer over here with this like certified doctor husband versus like this partner over here that like awakens my multidimensionality, and I'm scared to touch it. So I'm gonna go where it's safe and familiar.
Right. What my
You
soul
know,
really wants
really
versus
want is
what
feeling
my
attracted to
ego
you.
is
Yeah,
afraid to do and
yeah.
values the
We
safety.
we
because-
see that there's myriads of ways that people self-betray their souls whispers every freaking day. And that's just an exaggerated, more painful one to look at.
Right.
Because
Mhm.
we all, I think we're all, I think most spiritual people have a natural, hopeless romantic in them that wants to meet their soulmate. But then the Disney programming and the indoctrination and all the other stuff and the twin flame false light template, you know, it's actually when it's not coming from wholesomeness of like, you complete me, and like, I'm not, like, you're a God being, you're a multidimensional God being, like,
Right.
you get to have a mirror when you love these parts of yourself. It doesn't come before that. You don't bypass the self-love that you think you're going to get from someone else. Like, they're traps. It's a trap in consciousness, but it's also normal. We are pre-programmed for divine union. We're here for it. A lot of us are.
Right.
You know,
And
so
I think
it's deep. It's deep.
right. I think you nailed it where it's like at a soul level, you know that and you're longing for that. But then what happens is the ego and the unhealed
Yeah.
ego self gets
Yeah.
caught in the traps of like a trauma bond
Yeah.
or the narcissist empath relationship. And can, but like once it's so bad that they don't see the red flags and they fall for that, thinking it is the twin flame, thinking it is the divine union,
Right.
until finally the relationship blows up at a certain point, or sometimes people go many years in those and are in denial, and you know,
Yeah.
then it just makes their own trauma worse, and they're not healing. You know,
It's deep. I
I've
mean,
seen that many
that's a
times.
whole podcast in and of itself.
That's a whole. That's a
So-
yeah. That's a whole topic.
Yeah, we can go ahead and
itself.
start wrapping this up, but I do want to bring us back to something you said really quick about Atlantis or Lemuria. You talked about that infiltration hijacking the divine union, right? So it started back then or
Yep.
over there, if we're gonna
That's the seed fracture point, according
Right.
to my mentor. Yeah.
right, yeah. So this we could go on forever. Quite literally, I feel like this is
Oh yeah.
was a very expansive conversation. Thank you for joining us. Can you
Yes.
please let our audience know like what you offer and how they can find you and all that?
Yeah. I'm on socials, and my website and my music is all under Luke Kohen. That's Cohen with a K, so it's Kohen, Luke, Luke like Skywalker, Cohen like Cohen brothers. And I make spiritual hip hop and neo soul and future folk music. As a bard, I'm here to tell new mythology. So if you follow me on Instagram, I create a lot of inspiring content stories. I do have retreats. I do healing work. I do have a free community that I'm launching this year where I'll give 2 transmissions a month around the energies that we're passing through. So there's free ways to work with me, and there's, you know, ways to invest in yourself and everything in between. So I try to keep something for everybody, no matter where they are on their journey.
Yeah.
And I have a newsletter I'm launching this year. Bring it
Yeah.
back.
Thank you so much for that. I put your website in the description below. I'd love to hear more about your music. Maybe we can do this again someday.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'd love another
I just-
conversation.
I just dropped a song today called All of My Energy, featuring Lily Fangs and my best friend Herb Young, who's out of Chicago. And it's the chorus is, I'm calling all of my energy back to me, back to me, back to me. And it's a positive affirmation, because, you know, a lot of the hip hop that was like hijacked by the industry is you're creating negative subconscious affirmations, codependent affirmations, self-destructive affirmations. So this one's about calling all of your life force back from any place that you've given your power away.
I love
That's
that.
amazing.
We just
love it.
dropped a music video today for that.
Where is that available?
It's on YouTube. I have a YouTube with all my music videos as well. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Kohen. So
Okay,
I'll put
awesome.
the link in the description for
Right.
your YouTube. Yeah.
And ironically, we never even got to the sacred sites talk, but maybe
Oh yeah, that's right.
that's for
That'll be
another
the
time.
next show.
Next
Yeah.
time.
We were, for the audience, we were talking about it before we went live, and we were
Right.
going to start with that, but it just didn't happen that way. So
Yeah.
I felt like everything we shared was very necessary for people that are going to find this video. And I appreciate what you're doing, and keep up the great work. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining us today.
Congrats
And
on the book, and thanks for having me on. And if you guys ever want to come out to Glastonbury for Sacred Sites, I'll be out there. I'm out there most summers and falls. So
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
I
awesome.
yeah, we'll stay in touch. And yeah, everyone go check out his website. I'll put his YouTube video in the description as well. We'll go check out that new song he just dropped today. And
Awesome.
thank you all for being here. We can't do this without you. Thank you for the love and support. It means everything to us, and it's the reason we keep doing this. So until next time, have a great evening, afternoon. Good night.
cool, guys.
And I gotta